There's a feeling of comfort that arises around visiting a loved one in the hospital. As you drop everything else in your life, your reality shifts to become the hospital. You begin to learn the names of the nurses and the cafeteria workers, exchanging smiles with the same people on a daily basis. Peculiarly, you almost start to feel at home. When you wake up, you feel that you must instantly head straight to the hospital, as if you're wasting precious minutes that could be spent sat beside your loved one. Time loses all meaning other than the time that you are with them and the time that you are without them. I quickly learnt to love the small things, like fluffing his pillow or adjusting the shades if it was too bright or dark for his liking. You form a routine built with purpose, because while you may not be able to heal your loved one, you can still care for them. I loved to sit and watch him sleep, my eyes on the shallow rise of his chest as he breathed. When he would awaken, I would be there. My life consisted almost solely of observing his. Sometimes, due to the strong medication he was on, he'd become delirious and confused. He would mix facts, memories, and fantasy as he wove the most wonderfully surreal tales. At first, we tried to keep him lucid and correct his errors, as if it would help to keep him here with us. But as time went on, we began to join him in his reality, riding alongside him as he so imaginatively narrated his stories. It was beautiful to see a man so close to death, being so full of life and humour in his storytelling. Oftentimes he would tell us about late-night visits he'd had from loved ones who had died already or that we'd lost contact with years ago, and he'd usually have a fun anecdote of where they had been or what they'd gotten up to. One morning he told us how he'd had breakfast in Vienna after a fabulous dinner in Florence the night before. At times he would suddenly become Scottish and talk about his little cottage on the moors and the fishing he had been doing there the night before. On his last day, I was sitting with my eyes closed in a chair beside his bed. I wasn't asleep, but nor was I what is commonly referred to as awake. I found myself in a beautiful field of poppies and tall grass that sloped up a big hill. Through the middle of the field led a path, the grass parted as if somebody had climbed it recently. I began to walk up the hill and saw in the distance a white wrought iron table and chair set, upon one of which sat a man with his back to me. As I reached the top of the hill, he turned around, his face glowing with a warm and familiar smile. He looked so much younger and healthier than I could remember him being, but it was unmistakably my father. No glasses, no wrinkles, and his teeth were straight and white. I asked him where his glasses were, and he replied, "You don't need glasses, so now neither do I, as I exist within you. Take care of yourself, and you will take care of me." As he lay deep into his final slumber, I decorated him with flowers I had picked from beside the road on the way in. He looked so regal amongst the bright oranges, purples, and greens, and it felt so very appropriate to adorn him with the beauty of the earth as he was so close to his return to it. He died the day after. The moment he died, it felt like an enormous weight had been lifted, but in the same way I had lost my one and only father. I had also now lost the life that had so quickly overridden my life before. What was I meant to do with my days now? What did I used to do before all of this had even happened? Was I even still the same person? When I awoke the morning after, I felt so very unclear as to what I was to do with the hours awake before I could go to sleep again. It's so hard to fathom that someone that was such a vital part of your life could just cease to exist. On and off throughout life, a close friend may lose a parent, and out of denial, our mind blossoms the hope that, well, our parents will never die, or at least that when they do, it won't be for a very, very long time. The week after he died, I was filled with an almost holy feeling. Everything seemed so light, bright, and full of meaning. I would watch birds flying overhead and I would become them, feeling the twists and the turns of their flight deep within my soul. I would place my conscience into the trees and sway with them in the wind. I was totally at one with the world around me. Of course, there was an undeniable sadness in the background of all moments, but the beauty that shone through always seemed to take the foreground. During that sacred period, I began to see all sorts of patterns and transcendent coincidences in the world around me, as if he were sending little bursts of support from wherever he was now. I wasn't really seeing people, instead opting to go on little excursions alone. It felt like being on my own was the best way that I could be close to him. When you know and love someone with all of your heart, you can tap into the essence of who they are as a person. I could converse with him internally, tell him about my day, or ask him for advice, and because I knew him so well, he would be able to answer from within me. After a couple of weeks, though, the peace began to subside, making way for just a deep, deep sorrow. All that I had been pursuing in life suddenly felt totally meaningless and irrelevant, like I was an imposter playing the role of myself before all of this had happened. I was starting to lose the feeling of closeness to him, and it hurt immeasurably to realize. The holy energy that had kept me flying shortly after his death began to fade quickly into lethargy. The things that had given me comfort and meaning before were all disappearing into a bottomless abyss of what's the fucking point? I was beginning to feel that the only place that I wanted to be was in bed and asleep. On one particular week, I went round to his house and existed, for I cannot say I truly lived, between his sofa and his fridge. I numbed myself with endless movies and video games, eating my weight in whatever I could rustle up in a couple of minutes. I felt guilty for wasting the life that I was lucky enough to still have left, but at the same time completely powerless to pick myself up and change anything. Intermittent memories of him would flash across my mind, and I would physically wince in agony, my heart repeatedly breaking. It was impossible to turn off the TV, as the silence and the lack of stimulation made me feel so much more alone. One night, about a month and a half after he died, I dreamt of him. I was in a school, rolling a long carpet down a hall, when I looked up to see him standing there watching me. As our eyes met, he looked startled and withdrew into a wall, pressing his back and arms up against it as if to blend in. I told him that I could still see him, and he just stayed there, cheekily smiling, pressed up to the wall like a reverse gecko. When I awoke the morning after, I felt relaxed and full of joy. Even if it was a dream, it was nonetheless very special to see him. I haven't dreamt of him again much since, but I can vividly remember how he looked at me, and it gives me immense strength. I'd said to my housemates in Los Angeles, just before catching my flight home, that I was determined to make the most of his death, as you can only lose your father once. Looking back on it, I'm so pleased that during his decline and his ultimate death, that I was there for it all, really there. I wanted to experience every part of it, no matter how difficult or painful. For as long as I can remember, but now more so than ever, I often find myself feeling blue, like a yearning for something that I will never again be able to experience, a missingness deep in my being. This feeling of melancholy is my muse for all that I create, though, particularly my music. Because to explore the dark side of the heart is to grasp the magic and joy of life. To embrace darkness is to be truly honest with oneself that life is inherently difficult, and that suffering is a core component of being human. It endeavours not to hurt you, but instead allow you the chance to be truly alive in the here and the now. We must learn to wholly accept suffering if we wish to really appreciate what it is that we have. Hope cannot exist without despair, and courage means nothing without fear. I am grateful, and I am alive.